All right, hi everybody. It's Rob. I'm going to do my presentation on common law in Australia. The case I'm going to talk about deals with immigration and Aboriginal people. So, when I'm kind of going through my presentation, I'm going to be talking a lot about the Aboriginals. And if you're wondering why I'm doing that, it's because when I get to my case, I want you to understand, how the situation affects them. So, first off, just kind of like a quick history of Australia. The Aboriginals, the native indigenous people, uh, settled Australia, anywhere between 60,000 to 50,000 years ago. Um, the British would come in 1788 and establish a penal colony in Australia just because the prisons were overflowing. Um, and it would do well, and by the time of 1901, uh, Australia would become independent country. Important thing to know is when they signed their constitution, they did not include the Aboriginal people as citizens of Australia. And even though Australia became an independent country in 1901, they remained a British subject until 1987, which just kind of allowed people like Canadians, Caymanians, anyone kind of affiliated with England to come and go from Australia easier than people from Latin America or Asia or something like that. And at the time of me making this, Australia has a population of 25 million people, and about 800,000 are Aboriginals. And the thing I wanted to point out was, so this is like a population density map. Um, this city right here, right here, right here, right here, and right here have over 50% of Australia's population. These kind of darker areas here, and then the little lighter one right here, that's less people than the red, but this one has more than that one. And this yellow area in the center, you're barely gonna find anyone there. That's kind of like when you see the whole open area when you think of Australia. That's this area, and this is pretty much where the Aboriginals live. So, the way Australia's judicial system is set up is that since it started off as a English colony, um, not only did they bring Christianity and the English language with them, but they also brought the common law system with them. And unlike the US, where we decided we didn't want to keep the idea of solicitors and barristers and we kind of made attorneys our own thing, in Australia they still use it. And then, so right here, you're gonna have the small claims court, county court. This will be, district court. And then this area, right, this is gonna be their Supreme Court. The arrows are obviously how you can appeal the cases. And then the High Court of Australia right here is their federal Supreme Court. One thing I thought that was really interesting when I was researching this was that they have family court over here on the federal side, not over here with the civil and the criminal matters. I don't know, thought that was kind of interesting. So the case I'm going to talk about is actually two cases, but they're so similar that they've been kind of combined together in the media. So the cases are Love and Toms versus the Commonwealth of Australia, and Love and Toms are both guys in their mid 30s, later 30s, who were born outside of Australia. I couldn't really figure out where, but I'm pretty sure it was New Zealand, for both of them. And they had an Aboriginal parent, and they came to Australia at a young age, but they never got citizenship, and they've lived there ever since. And Australia, just like a lot of other countries, like the US, has a thing where if an illegal citizen or legal alien gets caught for a crime that's severe enough, they don't give them the option of staying. They just deport them. It fails. the decision is if they fail what they call the character test, which is if you're just kind of guilty of certain crimes or like the way your behavior is. They just don't want you in the country anymore. Pretty much like any kind of felony, pretty much is a thing that can have you fail the character test. Um, but so the whole thing is these guys have, spent the majority of their life in Australia and they don't really know anything about their native country. Um, so, they were trying to fight this deportation. And one of the things they brought up was their Aboriginal heritage. And for them to get deported, because they're not citizens, they have to be aliens. But they argued, how can they be aliens to Australia if they're Aboriginals? They were here before the settlers. So it went all the way up to the High Court, and it was a pretty close decision, 4-3 in favor, ruling that Indigenous people cannot be considered aliens. It does not mean that they are citizens, it just means that they cannot be considered aliens. And so this was decided in February of this year. I don't think enough time has passed to see how it has like really developed, but part of like the trickiness with this is just the way they worded the term alien has to be someone who comes from somewhere else. But since the Aboriginals were already there, it kind of debunks that definition. I don't know if that's the best word to use. But so the judges, thought about it and they got to a ruling and they just decided that, by the definition of the statute, like Aboriginals do not qualify as aliens. And then I've got the opening remarks from one of the judges who was in favor of the ruling. I just thought it was kind of a cool thing. Judge Michelle Gordon says, the deeper truth is that the Indigenous peoples of Australia are the first peoples of this country, and the connection between the Indigenous peoples of Australia and the land and waters that now make up the territory of Australia was not severed or extinguished by European settlement. So that was kind of a cool quote, really progressive thinking, acknowledging the fact that, these Aboriginals were there before the Australians, so just because they aren't technically citizens don't, necessarily think that they, don't have a right to be in Australia. So what I want to do now is I want to compare that to the U.S. The U.S., does similar things. People, if an illegal immigrant gets caught and, they committed crimes, they'll get deported. Sometimes they'll be able to stay. It kind of just depends on, like, the viewpoint of the administration and, like, the spirit of the times. Since Trump has taken office, he's got a big thing about, illegal immigrants and all that. So since he's, come into office, we've seen a lot of, deportation or attempted deportation of illegal aliens. That's not going to be different than how it is here. But what I kind of wanted to look at, too, was the idea of citizenship to native peoples and how that could maybe affect something. So the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which was signed in by President Coolidge, gave Native American peoples the right to be considered citizens of the United States because they weren't considered citizens in the Constitution. And even after, like, all the terrible things that happened, the Trail of Tears, all of that, and we, made these people pick up their lives, move across the country. We put them in, land that was, undesirable towards us. Before this act was passed, they weren't considered citizens if they were born on the reservation. So if I was born on a Lakota reservation in South Dakota and then I decided I wanted to go to Michigan, once I left my reservation, I was an illegal alien in the United States. Even if, my family's history went back to before the Pilgrims, even if I was born, on that reservation in the U.S., technically they wouldn't be considered a citizen. And it wouldn't be until the Nationality Act of 1940 that anyone born on American soil would be considered a citizen. Thinking about the Love and the Toms case, and with our own situation here with Native Americans in the U.S., I thought it was kind of interesting how when both countries got started, they were not about trying to incorporate or to not incorporate, but they weren't about to try and give rights to the indigenous people. If anything, they wanted the indigenous people to assimilate to their way of thinking. They weren't cool with the idea of just like, hey, you guys just continue to practice what you believe, but we're also going to respect that. I think it's interesting to see how long it kind of took in like this country, but just before we kind of started recognizing things that we there can be people here who we know who were here before us, but we want to tell them that they weren't citizens. And it's kind of the same thing with Australia. There's Aboriginal people who they, up until this recent ruling, had the option of being deported, who, if they did the 23andMe, the only thing that's going to show up is Australia. I think that's all. I think I ran a little long. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. Hopefully this was informative. And thank you for watching.